All right, the primary source document that we're going to read this week is really extraordinary. It's one of these documents that you can't believe really exists. I mean, I'm talking about George Fitzhugh and the Proslavery Argument, number 67 in your book, page 207, and we're just going to walk right through this. It's a fascinating document, and it's really important to understand because he crystallizes many of the arguments that Southern slaveholders and their adherents and their defenders in the nation were making in the decades leading up to the Civil War, right? Because as we've talked about, right, the Revolutionary War era leaders, they were ambivalent about slavery. They weren't sure that it was the right thing. They kind of knew that it went against the Bible. They kind of understood it went against the ideals of the nation. Even if they couldn't quite bring themselves to emancipate their slaves, they didn't want to advertise it. They didn't want to talk about it much, right? Don't mention it in the Constitution or anything. But in the decades after, especially after 1831, when you have Nat Turner's Revolt, you have the first publication of William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator, which in some ways marks the beginning of a new era in the abolitionist movement, kind of in reaction to the abolitionist movement, which we're going to talk more about in the next chapter, in the next weeks. Southerners feel very defensive. They feel under siege, and instead of reacting with more ambivalence or of a Jeffersonian kind, they develop this kind of offensive strike against the abolitionist argument to say, no, wait a minute. What we have is actually better for people than what you're talking about. That what you have going on in the North, that's a problem. That's wrong. Our society here is the ideal society. This is the way life ought to be. As Mainers like to say, right? Southern Fitzhugh and other Southern slaveholders and sympathizers say the South has got it figured out. And so here he's going to explain why he thinks that slavery is not just a necessary evil, but actually a positive good. And he's not alone. I mean, Fitzhugh may be among the more articulate and prolific pro-slavery writers, but he is by no means alone. He represents a large current of thought in the Southern mainstream in the years leading up to the Civil War. So he starts out. He starts out talking about his own shift. Right, 10 years ago, I became satisfied that slavery, black or white, and that's really interesting. Right, black or white, was right and necessary. Again, no ambivalence anymore. It's right and necessary. Of course, nobody's talking about white slavery here. Every slave in the country is black. Not every black is a slave, but every slave is a black person. Liberty and equality are new things under the sun. Now that's interesting, right? Because that sounds like an argument in favor of of liberty and equality, what's going on in the North, right? I mean, that was kind of the whole idea of the revolution, was that we were going to create this new society, that we were going to create something that the world never seen before, a beacon of hope and freedom. But he's using that to say this is the problem, right? Liberty and equality are not the way life should be. The free states of antiquity abounded with slaves. And he's going back to Greece and Rome. The feudal system that supplanted Roman institutions changed the form of slavery, but brought with it neither liberty nor equality. France and the northern states of our Union have alone fully and fairly tried the experiment of a social organization founded upon universal liberty and equality of rights. Right? So he's trying to isolate the North and France, not only from the South, but from all of history, and say that experiment has already failed. Right? The North has tried it the last few decades. It's already failed. He's writing in 1854. He says, look, you tried, it doesn't work. The only society that works is a society with slaves. Liberty and equality have not conduced to enhance the comfort or the happiness of the people. Right? People aren't happy in a competitive society like what's going on in the North, right? So he's going to contrast, right? Because what's going on in the North? Well, we've heard about this. We've been reading about the market revolution, urbanization, factories developing, right? It's a very different kind of lifestyle than what people have been used to. And he's right. This is new. This is different. He thinks that's a bad thing. The struggle to better one's condition, to pull others down or supplant them, is the great organic law of free society. All men being equal, all aspire to the highest honors and the largest possessions. None but the selfish virtues are encouraged, because none other aid a man in the race of free competition. The bestowing upon men of equality of rights is but giving license to the strong to oppress the weak. Right? Here's the flip side of that paternalistic argument. So he's seeing himself as a paternalist. He's the strong man in the South, in the Southern conception, who then has a responsibility to protect the weak, right? The women, the slaves, the children, right? In an egalitarian society where everyone has equal rights, nobody has that responsibility. And so you're just giving license to the people who are more talented or more ambitious or more aggressive. These people are going to take control and are going to dominate, manipulate, and exploit the weak. In Southern society, according to Fitzhugh, we don't do that, right? There's no rivalry, no competition to get employment among slaves, as among free laborers. Nor is there a war between a master and slave. The master's interest prevents his reducing the slave's allowance or wages in infancy or sickness, for he might lose the slave by so doing. Right? So he says, in a slave society, we have an economic interest to protect our slaves, right? We're not going to beat them and hurt them and kill them. We don't do that because that's not in our interest to do so. His feeling for his slave never permits him to stint him in old age. The slaves are all well fed, well clad, have plenty of fuel, and are happy. Right? This is fundamental to the paternalistic understanding of slave society. Right? Everything's just hunky-dory. We treat our slaves perfectly well. They're happy. Right? They have no dread of the future, nor no fear of want. A state of dependence is the only condition in which reciprocal affection can exist among human beings. The only situation in which the war of competition ceases. And peace, amity, and goodwill arise. Right? He's contrasting the supposed harmony of the South with this competitive, this fierce, this dog-eat-dog kind of world that the market revolution has brought to the North. A state of independence always begets more or less of jealous rivalry and hostility. A man loves his children because they are weak, helpless, and dependent. He loves his wife for similar reasons. Right? That this is how you create peace, right? You have a hierarchical society where there are certain people at the top who have power and who are responsible for everyone else below them. And as long as people know their place, they're happy within their place. Once you start telling people that they're equal and everybody's on an equal plane, then they start fighting each other, right? Because they're competing constantly for employment, for rewards, for wages, whatever. And that's a recipe for constant strife, according to Fitzhugh. And then he goes on, right? At the slaveholding South, all is peace, quiet, plenty, and contentment. And, we read this now, and we're like, you've got to be kidding me, right? Is this guy for real? And he is. And that's the thing to understand, is that Southern slaveholders profoundly believe this. And this is largely going to be the same argument that Southerners are going to make white Southerners are going to make 100 years later in response to the Civil Rights Movement, where they're going to say, look, we're happy here. We have harmony. Segregation keeps us happy and keeps the friction and tension out. It's the same argument. We have no mobs, no trade unions, no strikes for higher wages, no armed resistance to the law, but little jealousy of the rich by the poor. We have but few in our jails, fewer in our poorhouses. Right? He's making the South seem like this utopia. We produce enough of the comforts and necessaries of life for a population 3 or 4 times as numerous as ours. We're wholly exempt from the torrent of pauperism, right? No beggars in our streets. Crime, agrarianism, and infidelity, which Europe is pouring from her jails, and almshouses on the already crowded North. Right? Again, he's contrasting what the South has with the evils that he sees in the North. Population increases slowly, wealth rapidly. In the Tidewater region of eastern Virginia, as far as our experience extends, the crops have doubled in 15 years, while the population has been almost stationary. Right? Again, he's just talking about how good the South is and what a wonderful place it is. He goes on later to say wealth is more equally distributed than at the North, where a few millionaires own most of the property of the country. And these millionaires are men of cold hearts and weak minds. They know how to make money, but not how to use it, either for the benefit of themselves or of others. Right? This is going to be a key, even though it's in parentheses, a parenthetical aside. I mean, this is a key argument that Fitzhugh and other slaveholders make about wealthy Northerners. Like, you don't know what to do with money. You don't care about anything but making money. You don't care about your workers. You don't care about culture and literature and art. We here in the South have cultivated the arts and leisure activities. And we are a different breed. Right? We know we're old money as opposed to these new aggressive money makers in the North. High intellectual and moral attainments, refinement of head and heart give standing to a man in the South, however poor he may be. Money is, with few exceptions, the only thing that ennobles at the North. Right? So he's saying, you've made money your God. Right? By making everything egalitarian, it's all it is competition, fighting for money. Because we don't have any pretense about equality in the South, we don't have to worry about that. We can spend our time cultivating higher pursuits. And so, again, he keeps going over and over about how the way the South is set up is superior to the North. So it's like a politician seizing upon what other people think is his greatest weakness and jumping on that and making it his greatest strength. And that's what he's doing. I'm going to skip down toward the end of 209 here, where he says, actual liberty and equality with our white population has been approached much nearer than in the free states. And this is where he's getting to a little bit of what Foner talks about in the book, of this idea that we talked about before, that freedom and slavery grow together because slavery provides the basis of low skill, unskilled grunt work, grunt laborers who do all the crappy jobs that others don't want, which allows for poor white people to enjoy much greater freedoms and more political rights than they ever could anywhere else. And so that slavery provides the basis for white freedom, and especially this Jacksonian democracy that has been spreading in these decades of the early 1800s. And so this idea that Fitzhugh is trying to make is that we can have much more of white equality and freedom. If that's what you're so worried about, equality and freedom, we've got it in the South, just among our white people, right? Much more than what you have of the North, right? Few of our whites ever work as day laborers, none as cooks and scullions, like none of these menial jobs, right? Because they're all taken up by black folks. And we don't lord it over another. It's a distinction. He concludes, it's a distinction to be a Southerner as it once was to be a Roman citizen. Right? So he's trying to emphasize that the market society that the North has embraced that's the problem. That is a much less healthy, much more tense and hostile kind of place than the South. Slaves are happy here. We're happy here. Why are you fussing about it? So my question for you is to write a rebuttal. Write a rebuttal to Fitzhugh and explain why you think slavery is wrong, and how would you counter his arguments about slavery? That's your extra credit question.